Hello and welcome. It's Corrina. Thank you so much for joining me for this live chat. I am a holistic health coach and yoga teacher, and this is your opportunity to ask your health and wellness questions. There it is opening up on my phone. Okay, just wanted to make sure that it's working because I have a little bit of a different setup, and I also was not depending on there being a bunch of people in here right when I start. Since this is my very first chat on this channel, it's looking a little bright actually. Let me just All right. So I had a question last night in the ASMR live chat, the ASMR live chat, if you will. And I want to address that. It was a question about water and essentially whether or not we should be prioritizing having filtered versus tap water, and then some thoughts around all of these different little water flavoring additives? I don't know what you call it. Things that you would add to your water to give it flavor. Mel, you're here. I'm so happy to see you, sweetheart. Set looks a little bit different in the light of day, I feel. But I thankfully was able to, I don't know. I think it looks a little bit more like a health coachy live chat than the ASMR one did. I'm not sure if I actually even need these. I don't know if I don't think I need these. Oh, good lord. All right. Well, the the earbuds just started working. Um, weird not to hear you whispering. Is it too loud? I'm taking these out because I can't handle it. Because I could turn this down a little bit if I'm too loud. Okay, cool. Um, yeah, it's so funny in ASMR land, you get so like hyper focused on the levels and the sounds and everything, but then in like regular video land tends to not be as much of an issue. Um, so if there's a lot of people in here who end up wanting more of an ASMR style thing, I will totally do that. But when I'm talking about health information in general, it's definitely a little easier for me to just kind of speak in my regular voice and my regular pacing. That's the main thing. Because in ASMR world, you're talking so slow. It would take me like an hour to get out a thought that I can get out in about 10 or 20 seconds at my regular pacing. All right. So you had the question, Mel, wasn't that your question about it was like water filtered versus tap water and some of those different, I don't even know what to call them, water thingies. So generally speaking, I do think that filtered water is always going to be a better option. Now, granted, that's not always available to us. So I just want to begin by saying tap water, or really any water, is better than no water at all, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm just going to not drink water. And that's not a good remedy if you don't have access to filtered water. So, depending on where you live, you can even search in your city or zip code or whatever, and you can see what is in the water in the place where you live. And there's a lot of different resources now that will even kind of compare different areas. So, looking at things like the cleanliness of the water, what's added to the water. Now, a lot of things that they add to the water, they're adding to clean it, right? Like the chlorine, um, fluoride is a whole other kind of topic. I think there's a lot of things that have been said about fluoride that aren't necessarily true, but the idea that it was added to the water to help improve the health of our teeth, and then they ended up finding that taking in fluoride systemically doesn't give you the same benefits as like the topical fluoride swish that we do at the dentist. So this addition of fluoride to the water for helping the teeth, they found like doesn't really help. I personally prefer to try to avoid fluoride in the water, but I also think it's one of those things that has gotten a lot of negative press about it that isn't all necessarily warranted. So one of the first things you can do is kind of look at the water where you live. A lot of people live in places where the municipal water or the tap water is actually really, really clean. And there's a lot of people who really don't need to be looking for filtered water because they have a really good, pretty clean, available water system. Now, if you're in a bigger city or you're next to a place with a lot of factories, a lot of machinery, things like that, these are the types of things that can potentially contaminate the water in the place where you live. So, looking up the tap water status in the place where you live is, I think, a good step. From there, there's a lot of different water filters. There's the kind of cheaper level, like the little Brita pitcher, which a lot of people use. There's also much more expensive water filtration systems. Um, in the place where I live, I don't have the ability to put a water filter on the tap because it is such an old sink. Anyhow, so I have been getting spring water from the grocery store and I just refill these big giant things of water periodically. So I'm drinking spring water that I get from the grocery store, which I feel really good about. But in the previous place I was living, I did have a water filter in the house that I used. Um, the other consideration is the bottled water, right? Because a lot of people just go to Costco or Sam's or wherever and buy big pallets and pallets of bottled water. Now, not only is the bottle the water is placed in a consideration, right? We have that bisphenol A or that plastic chemical that's in the plastic that now they're finding when it leaches into the water isn't so good for us. Great. Why did y'all make the water bottles out of something that we shouldn't be ingesting? Another question for another live chat, perhaps. Um, Also, the fact that, okay, so not only is the water being kept in plastic, then it's being kept in a usually a very hot, what do they call that? I'm thinking for what the word boardroom coming to mind. Storage. In the storage place where the waters are sitting most of the time, it's not temperature controlled. And when you have a plastic water bottle plus heat, now you're increasing the amount of those different um, bisphenol A type chemicals that can leach into the water. So I feel like bottled water, while it's certainly um, I'm not going to sit here and say that I never drink bottled water or I never drink out of plastic because I certainly do. It certainly happens from time to time. I don't completely avoid it like 100%. That'd be really, really hard to do. But when it comes to the water that you're drinking all the time or buying for your family, I think big pallets of bottled water in plastic is maybe not the most ideal choice. Now, depending on where we live, that might be the actual best choice for you. So, depending on what is our city water like? What is our availability of water like? Do we have the availability of doing something like refilling glass jugs of water on a regular basis? Again, depending on where you live, all of these things are going to be available, varyingly available to you. So hopefully, I don't know, I feel like I'm sitting here rambling about water. And then the last thing that you had asked was all of those little things that we add to the water. And I actually had some that I had bought probably 5 or 6 years ago, specifically to show in a video. And of course, I could not find it today while I was looking for it. But in general, those little water additives I feel are not only typically loaded with a lot of sugar, which obviously is going to make our water taste better, but arguably, if you're adding sugar to the water, this is maybe, something that we don't want to get in the habit of doing. We need to drink just plain water. So not only do a lot of them have sugar, if they don't have sugar, they'll have artificial sweeteners. And a lot of them have both. What I see more often than not now is that even the things that do contain sugar, um, also contain artificial sweeteners. And then anything that says sugar free on it, that is almost always a telltale sign it's going to contain those artificial sweeteners. So we know about aspartame. Aspartame was getting so many FDA complaints. It was the most complained about food chemical. Well, they started realizing that. What was their solution? Not to take aspartame out of the food supply, it was to come up with a couple of different artificial sweeteners they could use that would have a different name to confuse us. So the acesulfame potassium, ACESULFAME, acesulfame potassium, or sometimes it'll say acesulfame K. But usually I see that acesulfame potassium. God, that's hard to say. And the other one, sucralose. Sucralose. Because sucrose is just sugar, but the sucralose is an artificial sweetener. And it's basically the same as aspartame, or at least it's largely similar to aspartame, but looks totally different. Looks inconspicuous. Most people, if they see that sucralose, they're just going to think, oh, sucrose, sugar, not a big deal. And I believe that they did that on purpose. And I think they did the same thing with the acesulfame potassium too, because people will see that. They don't know what the first word means, but then they see potassium and they think, okay, well, that's probably not so bad. Yowzers. Jules, I did not get to your question yet. I'm doing Mel's question about water that she asked in the ASMR live chat last night, but then I will get to yours here in just a moment. So between either sugar, artificial sweeteners, or both, most of those little flavors are going to have those. Most of them also have artificial colors. So we've got those. It's a number with a color name with a number after it, right? So yellow 5, red 40, blue 2. We see these all the time. And again, they kind of look like, oh, it's not that bad. Well, unfortunately, when you look at the actual chemical name of those chemicals, it's insane. Um, in that video, do y'all remember that video I did so long ago? Food chemicals, not vegetables. What in the bleep is in this peep? Anyways, I did this food chemicals song where it was all about food chemicals. And one of the food chemicals I talked about in there was yellow 5. And I actually showed in that video the actual chemical name of yellow 5. And I just was shocked. So basically, when you see those really, really long chemical names, essentially what that's telling you is that your body, in order to break that thing down, because in order for your body to digest it, it's got to break every single thing down into its most basic parts, right? We eat protein, got to break down all the amino acids and turn it back into protein. So when you see a long, long chemical name, one of the things that's telling you is there's going to be a lot of chemical reactions needed to undo all of the chemical reactions that were done to make that chemical. And that's probably like the least of which we should be concerned with. To me, that's just a very like kind of simple, straightforward way of thinking about it. Well, now after all of these, it's been about, I don't know, 10 years since I started talking about artificial colors on the internet. Now they've actually done a lot of research and they're able to directly link things like artificial colors and ADHD, or artificial colors and other learning disabilities, other issues. And I believe that it's just a matter of time before the list of those issues just grows and grows and grows. Everything runs on a delayed reaction, right? So maybe we will find out in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years what's actually in the foods that we were filling ourselves with 30 years before. So I personally do everything that I can to avoid those artificial colors. And that brings me to, actually, I didn't bring them. I don't have them over here. So even as far as the M&Ms and stuff. So M&Ms, Skittles, every single one of those mainstream candies, if it's colorful, it's going to have those artificial colors. Unless you're buying something that specifically maybe says on the label that it doesn't contain them, or you've read the ingredients on the back, or maybe you look on the back and it'll say something like beet juice for color, or, colored with, and then it'll kind of give you the vegetable components. Most of those colorful foods do contain the artificial colors. And then certainly if we're talking about sodas and sports drinks, Gatorade, all of those things are just loaded with the artificial colors. I personally avoid them. I have seen plenty of research to kind of fuel my fire in avoiding them. it is a personal decision for people. I know that I feel like anything that you say about health on the internet these days, you're gonna have like a slew of people come out and be like, "That's a bunch of crud and you're crazy and you're," you know, that's fine. Y'all can think whatever you wanna think about me. I choose not to eat them. And so Mel B chiming in, a friend of mine has a son who can't have red 40. It messes with him. So, this is just a great example of, a specific instance where they're able to kind of pinpoint a chemical and link it to some kind of undesired symptom or issue that the person's having. And just like they could say a person is allergic to any other food, we can have direct allergies to these foods, or perhaps some people just have a more pronounced reaction that's kind of the same reaction everyone has, but some people just have it more significantly. But I think it's very telling. If there are certain people who end up being, discouraged from eating a certain food, and we see this over and over and over again, right? So I've seen lots of instances where children are put on a no artificial colors regimen. You see that enough times and you just start to realize like, "Oh, yeah, this is probably not good for anyone." Let me know. I feel like okay, so let's see. That was about 16 about 16 minutes talking about water. I'm gonna try to not spend so long talking about every topic. That's anyway. But if y'all want me to continue talking on that topic, I'm more than happy to. The last thing I will close with is just drink your regular water. If you really can't handle drinking water, flavor it with fruit. So maybe if you like raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, something like that, just take some of the fruit and put it in your water. You can either let it sit there or you can kind of crunch it up in the bottom, muddling, as we like to call it in whatever they whatever world is that they muddle things. But even things like mint or a little bit of maple syrup or a little bit of honey, if you really need that sweetness to help you get down a glass of water, then add a sweetener. I just encourage you to make it something that is a natural source of sweetness. Because when you're eating something like honey or maple syrup or coconut sugar, you're getting all of the nutritional benefits that are included in that food. So, maple syrup has a lot of minerals. For thinking about coconuts, coconuts have a bunch of different health components in them. So when you're using a actual food source of sweetness rather than a refined source of sweetness or an artificial source of sweetness, that's always going to be better. Um, Hint water. I have seen those. I think I'm pretty sure I've had one of those before as well. Um, but yeah, adding a little something special to the water is a good way to encourage yourself to drink more water. So I'm all about this is kind of like the water talk controversy that I was mentioning last night. Like, at which point are you adding so many things to your water that it's no longer beneficial? I would say that if you're drinking water, it's always beneficial. And then we just have to, find some happy balance with what are we adding to it? How often are we adding those things? Are we ever just drinking plain water? And certainly the extent of how much of something we're adding, because some people I would see put like so much of that flavored stuff in the water, then the water looked like a Gatorade. And I'm like, well, so finding the happy balance is, I think, kind of a personal plight we have to go through to figure out what works for us. But yeah, those hint waters I think are good. Okay, let me go back up here. Okay, Jules' question. Jules, thank you for being here, sweetheart. All of y'all that are in here right now, thank you for being here. What is the difference between your job and a dietitian besides education and training? So certainly a registered dietitian is going to have a lot more schooling and just in general coming through the education system, whereas the program I did was kind of a private thing, right? The Institute of Integrative Nutrition was the name of the health coaching program I did. And So the education, the training, I would also say one of the main differences is, I guess, the approach or the philosophy wherein. So in the world of a registered dietitian, they're kind of in the, I don't know what you want to call it, mainstream paradigm. So in the mainstream paradigm, you kind of have a lot of, um, you know, for lack of a better term, a little bit more pharmaceutically endorsed, so to speak. So if we're talking about what is the mainstream paradigm of health, to me what that means is the big food corporations that are, you know, not only making most of the foods that we eat, but like these people have made so much wealth for themselves off of these food companies, that like now they're in like mega corporation land. So the size of the big corporations that are creating the food, the mainstream education system, right? So when we're thinking about all of the different universities, most of the universities get a lot of their funding from the pharmaceutical industry. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not inherently a bad thing, right? It kind of makes sense. The pharmaceutical industry is like, hey, Harvard, why don't you go and study XYZ? We're going to fund you to study ABC and RYD or whatever. So there's just a relationship. It's got big food manufacturers. We've got the university system, a lot of which, certainly most universities are not going to do something or do research that's going to shine negatively on pharmaceuticals because the universities get so much of their funding from the pharmaceuticals. Then we have the FDA hanging out in that same jurisdiction, I would say. And there's a lot of, what do we call, people call it revolving door, some people call it a conflict of interest. But essentially, the oversight of the food and drug uh, distribution networks of the country. So whether that's you're getting a prescription from a doctor, you're buying food in a big box store, all of these kind of mainstream medical groups or approaches, they're all going to kind of have a similar philosophy when it comes to our health. And that is what I think is really the kind of quintessential difference, or the biggest difference between a holistic health coach and a dietitian. A dietitian is kind of within that mainstream framework where they're typically going to have a lot more knowledge about different medical treatments, different drugs that are available. They're a little bit more medically minded, right? A dietitian gets a lot more training and experience in how different people with different conditions should be eating. Whereas my program was a little bit more general. It was a little bit more like a look at a lot of different diets and kind of benefits of each one, benefits of different types of eating. But the type of person that we're talking about is a little bit more like your average health situation, whereas a dietitian is going to be much more versed in more specific types of situations, like someone is a type 1 diabetic. I would consider that a registered dietitian probably has a lot more training in how a type 1 diabetic or someone with some other kind of medical diagnosis should be altering their diet. Um, so philosophy wise, I think is kind of a big difference. Obviously, the education and training is a lot more extensive for a dietitian. If someone is considering like, I don't know what to do. Do I need to become a dietitian? Should I do a holistic health coaching program? I'm not sure which. Then that is really a situation where I would encourage you to ask yourself what type of person you want to be helping. Do you have a really specific group in mind? So, just to use what I used a second ago, type 1 diabetics. If you're like, man, I really want to help this specific group of people that have a very specific type of condition, then a registered dietitian program is probably more along the lines you want to do. My type of health coaching, I'm really more often just working with kind of people that don't have really extreme conditions or really extreme diets they're trying to do. Just kind of more like you don't have a specific condition, but you're trying to eat healthier or trying to lose weight. That's a big one because we've all been brainwashed to think that there's something wrong with our bodies. Perhaps another topic. But point being, if you are not sure who you wanna help or what you wanna do, then that might be a good opportunity to do both. Or maybe you're just gonna look at which program is, which path, so to speak, is more financially available to you. The program that I did was not nearly as expensive as doing a full registered dietitian program. So that is oftentimes a consideration as well. But largely, I would ask a question like, do you have a strong philosophical pull either towards more of a holistic or natural approach, or do you feel more pulled to helping people with more specific medical diagnoses and maybe doing something that is a bit more, I guess, um, I don't want to say scientific, but when you're talking about people with very specific medical conditions or very specific dietary recommendations that they need to do because they have a lot of different health issues going on, there's a lot more science involved. In making sure that person is getting everything that they need and also making sure that they are getting the nutrients they need. Because I think that's the hardest part. When you start putting in all these dietary restrictions, now it becomes a challenge just to make sure you're getting the basic macronutrients and micronutrients that your body needs. And so, again, very sciency, right? I don't know if that answered your question. I realize that sometimes I'm sitting here and I just keep I just keep blabbing, but I will instead ask you guys, did I answer your question? If I didn't, let me know. I can go back to it, but I will try to keep going on to questions. Aflac 0. Aflac. I just think about the little duck. Okay, intermittent fasting. Holy camole. I have a lot of thoughts about intermittent fasting. I'm gonna pause, summarize my thoughts for a second, take a little sip of water. Good, Jules. I'm glad it was helpful. Very glad to hear that. Okay, intermittent fasting. So the first thing that I think is important to say, and it's so funny. I bought a dry erase board because I like having visual images. I know that I like having a little visual aid. But then my freaking dry erase markers didn't come with it. So I'm like, what? Anyway. So without a dry erase marker, I realized the dry erase board, yeah. But I am still going to use a bit of a visual. Um, so here we have a day. Now, I think that largely there's um, there's a lot of different approaches that can help someone to lose weight, right? Now, one of the ways is you just are going to eat a lot less and essentially starve yourself. Starving yourself is often an effective way of losing weight for people. Funny how that works. But starving yourself also is kind of got a certain time limit on it, right? There's very few of us that are going to actually be able to um, maintain a calorie deficit for an extended period of time. And honestly, people who do that are often considered to have eating disorders. So, this concept of, oh, I'm just going to significantly reduce how much I'm eating to lose weight, while it does theoretically work, it's not healthy for us and is really not sustainable in terms of weight loss. I think a lot of the intermittent fasting diets that I have seen come and just slamming me in the face, because that's how these things are these days. There's a lot of them. A lot of them are using this word intermittent fasting to shield the fact that they are just trying to put people in an extreme calorie deficit. And there has to be a distinction made between the benefits of intermittent fasting and just downright starving yourself, because they are not the same thing. Sometimes they can have a similar result, but they are not the same thing. So let's go back to our visual. Um, have to still eat. Exactly. As soon as you have perpetuated a caloric deficit long enough, your body goes into panic mode and starts telling your body, hey, don't burn off that extra bit of stored fat. Don't burn off that energy. We might need that. I mean, it's so it's so I will say I'm having so much fun with you guys doing this chat, and thank you to, I think it was Bessa65 who requested to do it. Hopefully, she's able to pop in here as well. Um, but I have so much I wanna say that I get a little wound up, and then I know I'm a little bit here and there. But, so differentiating between the benefits of intermittent fasting, which I'm gonna talk about in a moment, and just, you know, uh depleting our bodies too much of food, too similar to a caloric restriction that mirrors an eating disorder. This is bad. And even if it is cloaked in something that's called an intermittent fast or OMAD, right? One meal a day. We hear that a lot now. Um, I feel that it still all looks more like this to me than intermittent fasting. So let's talk about what intermittent fasting means. So here we have our day. I'm gonna put a little in case y'all weren't sure, I wrote a day on it and got 24 hours. And the concept here is just to kind of think about breaking our day into chunks. And we could kind of imagine, so maybe 8 of these hours we're asleep. And then we're awake for you could look at it as 2 8-hour chunks or 3 6-hour chunks and a little chunk of sleeping, however you want to do it. But the idea here is to start considering that in between our meals, we do have a certain period of fasting. Oh, Elle Smith, glad you are here. Yes, I'm so passionate about nutrition. I really am. So let's do a little different of a thing. Let's do 4, 4, 4. This is why I'm not an artist. Not an artist. Okay. Well, my my shifting or the spacing is messed up, but the concept of the same, right? So let's say 4. Let's say that these are our 4-hour chunks between meals. So each little spot here is where we've had a meal. So maybe there's like here's breakfast on this end, here's lunch, and here's dinner. Or I guess we'd look at more like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The idea is that the space in between the times that you're eating is your intermittent fast. And the idea of intermittent fasting is just that we're going to definitely have these clear chunks of time between our meals. And in that time between our meals, our body is doing a lot of things. So it's digesting the foods that we've just eaten. It's handling whatever the blood sugar situation is of the meal we've just eaten. So, depending on what we eat, we're either going to get a really big blood sugar spike. So, things that give us a big, big, fast blood sugar spike would be anything with a lot of refined sugar. So, obviously, sweets and things like that, but also your refined carbohydrates. So, white bread or white flour. And I have mentioned enriched flour a couple times over the years. I mean, I've been talking about it for like 12 years, I'll just be honest. The enriched flour, in my mind, is essentially a refined carbohydrate, just like refined sugar. So, chemically, right, the carbohydrate's not exactly the same of the sugar. But when we're talking about what happens to your blood glucose levels, is very similar. There's a lot of similarities. So maybe this is a meal that had a lot of sugar. We had a Coke, right? We had a sugary drink with it. We had maybe a big plate of pasta or something with just a lot of carbs, but we get a big, big blood sugar spike. Now, the difference if we eat a healthier meal, and this is why to me it all comes down to just like making little healthier choices here and there when we can, because the blood sugar spike that we get from the meal has a big effect on not only our health and our energy levels, but this concept of intermittent fasting also is very, very relevant. So here we have the big blood sugar spike from eating something with a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates. I kind of messed this up. This is why I need a big board. Okay, so that was like one. That's the big blood sugar spike. Now, here is a bit healthier meal. And what do I mean by that? So, first, we would say, okay, we're going to have not a huge amount of refined sugar. We're not going to drink a Coke. Maybe we'll have a hint water instead of a soda because a soda is like 70 grams of sugar or something. I mean, it's insane. Um, so maybe we're not going to have a super sugary drink. Instead of refined carbohydrates, we're just going to have complex carbohydrates. I am not a person who says eradicate carbs from your diet. Don't eat carbs. Carbs are bad. Ixnay. I am all about just choosing the better source of carbohydrates because carbohydrates are your body's kind of favorite source of energy. It's not something that should be demonized in the diet. But what does need to be I feel differentiated between, not to repeat what I said a minute ago, but you know, uh refined. Man, my writing is terrible. Okay, so simple sugars or refined sugars, that's going to be your plain white sugar, right? It's also going to be your enriched flour or white bread. And guys, I've read enough food labels to just tell you, when I say that like pretty much all of the bread and pasta is the enriched flour, it's just because I've read so many food labels. So then on the other side, your complex carbohydrates, that's going to be our favorite thing, one of our favorite thing, potatoes, okay? Any kind of veggies, right? Complex carbohydrates. So your carrots, your squash, all of these different things. And sometimes, things like carrots and potatoes, they get, oh, they're evil. Oh, they're bad carbs. I am here to tell you these are healthy sources of carbs. And even though they do have carbs in them and starches in them, they also have a tremendous amount of nutrients in them as well. So, between the fiber that also comes when you eat one of these foods and the nutrients that you get when you eat the foods, these complex carbohydrates are good. And the difference when you eat them comes in the form of this blood sugar spike. So, this is the refined white flour blood sugar spike. It's really fast. Those foods, when they hit your bloodstream, almost immediately start getting broken down and turned to sugar, and we get this big blood sugar spike situation. So, here with the complex carbs, here with the complex carbs, not only do we have a slower rise in blood sugar, and typically the spike or the level of the blood sugar is not as high, you'll also notice that it lasts a lot longer. This is your satiation or your hunger being satisfied. This is why it matters what we eat. This is why fixating only on when we eat and not looking at what we eat is really not a successful approach, because every time we eat, we're going to do this if we're not being careful or just mindful of what we're eating. So, when we're a bit more mindful and we're eating some complex carbohydrates like potatoes, squash, carrots, brown rice would be a great example, and even your whole grain flours. So, um, you know, I would consider something that is like a whole grain, but not processed, to be better in this regard. But even a whole wheat bread or whole grain bread, whole grain flour, um, whole wheat noodles, whatever you want to say, is going to tend to have more of this slow spike. So, this is partly because there's less sugar. But even if the number of grams of sugar are the same between the refined food and the complex carbohydrates, what you're also getting in the complex carbohydrates is fiber and lots of nutrients. And the fiber is also one of the things that helps slow this blood sugar spike and keep it from being as high. Now, you can see if we consider, now we've got this idea here of like waiting time in between our meals, that's going to be a lot easier if our hunger is satiated longer. If we're eating foods that don't spike our blood sugar as much and actually keep our blood sugar high a bit longer, then we're going to feel satiated a lot longer. And now the time that we go in between our meals is going to be a lot easier. So I encourage people who are thinking about intermittent fasting to worry less about the fixation on the time. I'm not allowed to eat at this time. I am allowed to eat at this time. I can only eat during these hours. Worry less about putting the fixation on the time itself and put a little bit more focus on the what you are eating itself. And if you can just have an intention of eating foods that have more fiber, have more protein. So, healthy fats and healthy protein is another thing that helps this blood sugar spike be a little lower and be a little more drawn out. Part of the problem with this spiking the blood sugar very high is that at this point, this is like life or death for your body. Okay. When the blood glucose level is this high, this is welcome to the danger zone. Okay. This is welcome to the danger zone. Your body panics. Your pancreas panics. Your pancreas freaks the bleep out. It puts a huge amount of insulin into the bloodstream. And that's why the spike goes down so quickly, because now insulin is scurrying around the body, much as I do myself sometimes, scurrying around all about. Okay, um, the insulin goes out. It's kind of like the escort of the sugar. The insulin goes, it attaches to the glucose, and then it kind of escorts the glucose around to the different cells. And it's like, here, liver cell, do you need some sugar? Here, quadricep muscle cell, do you need some sugar? The insulin goes throughout the body. It's trying to get the different cells of the body to absorb the sugar so that the level of sugar in the bloodstream can go back down. One of the big problems when people are trying to lose weight and they're experiencing issues with it and this also relates to diabetes, um, is that over time, the cells will stop accepting sugar. Because if the liver cell or the quadricep muscle cell or whatever is sitting there and it's like, no insulin, I'm good, bro. You just keep on going. Well, if the insulin gets turned away and turned away and turned away and turned away, that's when our body starts to panic. This is what's known as insulin resistance. It's a little confusing because it sounds like the insulin is being resistant to something, but another way to think of it of is your cells are being resistant to the insulin. The insulin is walking by, it's trying to be very friendly. It's like, "Hey, can you take some of this glucose off my hand?" The cells are like, "Nah, man, we're good. We got more sugar than we can handle." Well, now the insulin starts feeling a little dejected. It's going around and you've just got too much sugar in your bloodstream. Now, if you're diabetic, too much sugar in your bloodstream is a huge, huge problem. Too little bloodstream sugar, right, is also a problem. So, this is a very, very delicate balance. Your body is always, and when I say always, I mean like 24 hours a day, every single second of the day, your body is always playing with this delicate balance of keeping the blood glucose level at an ideal amount. So, if we can avoid getting into this danger zone of the blood sugar spike, that is going to go a long, long way in helping keep the body healthy. Because if we're doing this blood sugar spike stuff too much, it tends to end up with that insulin resistance because the cells will just stop accepting more sugar. Okay, back to intermittent fasting. The foods we eat. I just really wanted to go over that first because I think so many people fixate on the times and then they put these rigid limits on themselves about what time they can eat or how much they're allowed to eat in a certain room of time. And I just think that it's much more nourishing to your body to not put those types of stringent rules on yourself and instead just try to focus on a general approach that you're going to increase the amount of time between your meals. So, minimally, a good amount of time between meals is 4 hours. If 4 hours between meals feels undoable for you, then maybe 2 hours or three. If you're someone who is used to just constantly being snacking all the time, then that is something that you really want to look at. If you're snacking all the time because your body's just constantly hungry, then again, I would come back to this concept of, are you spiking your blood sugar too much? Because if you're constantly spiking your blood sugar, sending your body into the danger zone, your body panics, pancreas panics, insulin comes out, you get this really steep drop. And it's really quick because the body's in that panic mode. Now, you can see where if we're doing these big blood sugar spikes and falls, look how hungry we are. That's why I did these on top of each other. So you can see, like, here the person ate, and that's how quick they got hungry. With a meal of complex carbohydrates, not only did the spike not get as high, but it's also lasting a lot longer. So now it's a lot more time before you're starting to get hungry again. And if you're focusing on what you're eating, you're going to find it's a lot easier to go some time between meals. So let's talk about the benefits of intermittent fasting because there definitely is a benefit to fasting between your meals or just not eating between your meals, right? So, in order for the body to actually burn the stored fat, here's a little bit I got right here. But we need that, right? Because our arm needs to be able to do all this stuff. It's so funny. They made us super, super insecure about this thing. But realistically speaking, it's just extra skin. It's extra skin our body needs in order for our arm to do all of these movements. But of course, they made us feel all really insecure about it. Um, so, we've got some excess energy. Rather than thinking it a fat, let's just call it excess energy. Got some excess energy stored on my backside. Got some excess energy maybe stored right here. wherever that excess fat or excess energy is being stored in the body is doing that as a mechanism to potentially save our lives. And I think that's a very important thing to remember whenever we're talking about weight loss or any type of topic is that the whole reason your body has held on to this extra weight is in its efforts to save your life one day. So don't hate your body for holding on to extra fat and don't hate the extra fat you have on your body. I encourage you to love and embrace and be thankful for that because it's there. And in certain circumstances, it would save your life one day. But in a context that most of us are in, where we're never going to be without food, our body's not going to, need that for survival. The body's only going to start burning that excess fat in very, very specific conditions. One of which is it feels safe. If your body is always in fight or flight, and now this is most of us, I think this is the reason most of us are struggling to lose weight. People who feel like they can't lose weight or they've been struggling to lose weight. I think the biggest reason is that we're all in fight or flight pretty much all the time. Just because of the world we live in, everything is overstimulating, over demanding. We have lights on all the time, 24 hours a day. We've become very detached from the natural cycle of wakefulness and sleepfulness that has, helped us survive up until now. Um, so when there's this kind of, um, safety message coming into the body, that is really, really important for your body to go into the fat burning zone, you could say. Ketosis is what it's called. And this is why the keto diet has gotten so popular. So, ketosis is when our body starts going in and actually burning the stored fat. It has to happen when our body feels safe. So if you're always stressed or you feel like you're always kind of in, and it's hard to know, like, am I in fight or flight? I mean, if you feel stress and anxiety and overwhelm and your breathing is kind of rushed and shallow, these are all good signs that you're in fight or flight. Like I said, I think most of us pretty much are always in fight or flight in this day and age. So getting your body into that um, uh, kind of situation where it feels safe and it feels like it can go into ketosis, this is where yoga and meditation and ASMR and sleep and finding ways to manage our stress and lower our stress is really important. So I just want to say that first and foremost. The second thing that your body needs is for the blood glucose level to be a certain amount and that's low, right? So when your blood sugar level is up here and there's so much sugar in your bloodstream, your body is panicking. It doesn't know what to do with all the sugar. Well, of course it's not going to go and start burning the stored sugar that your body stored last week or last year. So we have a couple of different components all coming into play. We need the body to feel safe. We need our blood sugar level to be low. And if we want our blood sugar level to be low, these blood sugar spikes all the time are, something we want to avoid. So it all comes back to that time that we're fasting between the meals. The time that we're fasting between our meals is really where our body can kind of go into that fat burning zone of ketosis because the blood sugar is low. So if you're doing all this intermittent fasting, you're like, oh my God, I'm waiting so many hours between the meals. Why isn't my body burning the fat? It's probably because you didn't do number one, which is making sure that your body feels safe. So intermittent fasting, that was a freaking long explanation about intermittent fasting, but I think that it's such an important concept. And if you can just kind of grasp the simple concepts around it, you don't even need all of the other crazy hoo-hasville that's out there right now, kind of overwhelming and confusing us. There's kind of a much more simple way of looking at it. And I think it's extending those times, the duration of time between the meals, making sure your body is feeling safe and is not in a state of fight or flight. And it all a lot comes back to the foods that you're eating. So, on that note, Jules has a little follow-up question here. What about keto white bread? Doesn't it break down slowly? Um, there are so many keto breads on the market these days. Here is one right here. Let me just take, of course, I'm looking at it. I pulled something up, but it's just a picture of a keto bread. It's not an actual ingredients. Let's see what is in it. So we've got Carbonot, Thin Slim. Okay, ingredients. Water, resistant wheat starch, wheat gluten, partially defatted soy flour, and wheat prot, which I'm guessing is wheat protein. Um, let's see. Here we've got some tortillas, water, resistant wheat starch, wheat protein, canola oil, milled flaxseed, and then 2% or less of a whole bunch of other things. Fava bean protein, yeast, guar gum, calcium propionate, fumaric acid, allulose. Um, allulose is not an artificial sweetener, but it is, what do they frickin' call that? A naturally occurring sugar found in figs, raisin, wheat, maple syrup, and molasses. But then they'll isolate it out, right? So, keto breads. I mean, I would definitely say that it would vary for me based on every single one depending on the ingredients. So that first one that I clicked on feels like it's a pretty like pretty basic ingredients, right? So we had the water, resistant wheat starch, wheat gluten. I mean, partially defatted soy flour. I don't know. That sounds. Okay, what do I want to say? What do I want to say? First thing I want to say is that keto as a um sales term is really what it is. It's something that was kind of founded on a basic concept, right? Someone was like, "Oh, you go into ketosis, and these certain, have these certain, uh, things met, right? That which is basically the time between meals, which is what allows your blood sugar to go low enough for you to burn fat." And then it just kind of became a whirlwind from there of people saying, "Oh, let's put keto on our products. Let's put keto on our products." It doesn't necessarily mean that every keto product out there is bad. It also doesn't mean that every keto product out there is good. I just really want to encourage you to be aware that the stuff you see on the front of the packaging is there to help make a sale of the item. And the word keto is one of those words, right? Same with sugar free or fat free. These are all things that typically what is put on the front of the package. Keto friendly, this one says keto bread. A lot of these terms are not really regulated or controlled, and they're basically there for marketing purposes. So I just want you to know that going into it. Now, that said, there's probably some things that are keto products that are actually decent products with decent ingredients. Let's find another one here. Modified resistant tapioca starch, egg whites, psyllium husk, chicory, inulin, flax seeds, acacia gum, xanthan gum, sea salt, and modified cellulose. This is Scotty's bread mix. Um, my problem with all of these that I've looked at so far, they're still processed. So what do I mean by that? Okay. Clearly, almost everything we eat is processed. And even a regular loaf of whole grain bread, that is still a processed food, right? There's nowhere that you can get a bag of bread that grows out of the earth. So when I talk about processing, there's a couple of different kind of components, right? Is what was done to the food that grew out of the earth to get it into the package that you're going to consume it, right? So when we see things like, what did this say? Modified resistant tapioca starch, xanthan gum, modified cellulose, partially defatted soy flour. These are all just examples of things that, like, they just kind of rub me the wrong way. If something just had soy as the ingredient, I would prefer that a million times to something with partially defatted soy flour, right? Sometimes things will just say soy protein or soy inulin or things like that. Those are still things that have been extracted from a soybean. So I mean, I feel I'm not sure if I'm like really um I'm not sure if I'm really conveying, but the idea is that eating soybeans, right? Like edamame, right? Soybeans. Eating soybeans is not bad for you. Soybeans in and of themselves aren't inherently bad for you. And soybeans in and of themselves, I believe, have a pretty mild blood sugar spike effect. And it is because of the protein and the fiber that is contained in the soybean, if you actually just ate a soybean. But once you start extracting the protein from the soy or extracting the this from the soy, yeast extract, this extract, da 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 da. Little almost got a little almost ASMR personal attention here of the ingredients being extracted from an actual food. As a holistic health coach, my preference for you is to always eat the actual food in as close to the state that it comes out of the ground in as possible. So if someone was like, what about eating edamame? Are soybeans bad? Are soybeans good for you? I'd be like, soybeans are actually have a lot of nutritional benefits for you. And at the point that we start hearing things like, oh, don't eat soy, soy's bad, soy is this, soy, all these things, a lot of the problems therein is that the soybean has now been turned into hundreds of other ingredients. Soy lecithin, soy extract, soy protein, soy whatever. And now, when you've extracted all these pieces from the soybean and you've put them in thousands of different foods, or you're drinking soy milk and soy this, and you're eating tofu, and like it starts becoming like, well, now you're eating more soy than you probably would have ever been able to eat if you were just eating soybeans. Like, how many bowls of edamame do you think you could eat in a day or eat in a week? Compared to the amount of soy that you could take in if you're having soy as an ingredient in tons of things that you're eating or drinking. Does that make sense? Um, so let's see. Let me come back over here. So keto white bread. You know, most of these ones that I looked at did not necessarily strike me as looking really great. Now, with that said, there are health benefits to some of these types of more keto friendly flours, right? So, what was that one? The tapioca starch. Tapioca flour is something that has become really, really prominent, especially with the rise of people who are trying to avoid gluten. So, excuse me, by trying to avoid gluten and trying to avoid wheat, people have started looking like, okay, well, what could we use instead of wheat? So tapioca flour is one of those really great examples of something that can be used instead of wheat flour. So if you had a bread that was just like tapioca flour, yeast, because need yeast to make bread, um, that I would consider, okay, that feels like an actual food. Right? So even though the tapioca flour does get processed and ground down to make flour, it's not as processed as something that's like, one of these ingredients that's tapioca based or a tapioca this. There's just so many of these different crazy ingredients um, that. Where was that one that I was looking at? Ah, oh yeah, modified resistant tapioca starch. Like, and then here again, they've isolated out the starch. The reason they isolate out the starch is because it tastes good. Because starch is kinda like sugar. That's why we like white bread. Well, here, now they've taken the tapioca flour, which as a whole tapioca flour, I think is okay for you and even has health benefits. But when you start extracting out the flour, I'm sorry, extracting out the starch or extracting out the protein, now you start messing with the nutritional components that are in the food. And when you start taking things away and taking stuff out, you start losing the nutrients. So, one of the big examples I like to give is when they take the fat out of dairy products or they take the yolks out of the egg. They're like, oh, we're going to take the yolk out of the egg and just have you eat egg whites. Well, guess what? When you just eat the egg whites, which is mostly protein, your body can't even absorb the protein the way that it's supposed to because the nutrients your body uses to absorb the protein in the egg white is actually in the yolk. So again, this is all like back to this concept of like holistic health and nutrition. The idea that eating the food in its natural state is always going to be better for you. And largely these different foods that take an actual food like tapioca or soybeans or whatever, and then they start extracting pieces and parcels out of it to make different things, that is always like red flag in my mind. Um, so if you're trying to do keto and you want to eat bread, I would encourage you to just kind of read the ingredients on things. If you want to email me, I can even help you with looking around and finding one. I would also just say that if you made your own keto bread at home out of real ingredients, then I would 1000% be in favor. So maybe you're like, okay, it's going to have tapioca flour, it's going to have whatever, this like freaking other thing, whole wheat flour. Um, Typically, if something is white, a white bread, it's because it's had the minerals taken out of it. It's had a bunch of the nutrients taken out of it, and they've just isolated out the sugary, starchy part. So, in general, a brown bread is probably always going to be healthier because it's more likely to have those other components of the grain. So, the grain. Obviously not what a wheat grain looks like, but let's just for the sake of argument, we'll even turn it into a little peace sign here. So it's the germ, the endosperm, the germ, anyways, it's three different parts of the grain. And essentially to get that bread to be white, that flour to be white, they just isolate out the starchy stuff. Right? So now you've got this sweet, starchy white bread, but the other components of the wheat grain that were removed from it are actually where the fiber and the nutrients are that you want to eat. So, if it's between a whole grain regular bread or a keto white bread, I would definitely prefer you to have the whole grain brown bread, even if it doesn't say keto on it, just because it's going to have more of those nutrients that are found in the grain. Um, so, because the fiber cancels out the carbs. The idea of fiber canceling out the carbs, it's a little bit of a simplification. I'm sorry, oversimplification. But the concept is valid, I feel. And the idea, I think what they're largely referencing comes back to my little illustration of the simple versus complex carbohydrates. So when we're talking about the fiber canceling out the sugar, largely what they're talking about is that blood sugar spike. because the fiber in the food helps to slow down how quickly the food breaks down and how quickly it spikes up your blood sugar. So when we're talking about things being keto, like this is one of the things they're talking about is okay, we're going to try to avoid having these big spikes in the blood sugar. But rather than saying that, they just have to use this big marketing term, keto. Um, but I would prefer you to kind of understand the concepts. So, so the fiber, it's not completely erroneous to say the fiber cancels out the carbs. It's just to say that in terms of the um, quick, the speed of the food being broken down and the amount of sugar that's broken down is kind of slowed by the fiber. Um, so you kind of can get a little bit less intense of a blood sugar spike by something that has fiber in it. But I would always encourage you to like get that fiber from the natural source of the food, right? So rather than isolating out the fiber from the soy and then adding that into the tapioca starch, I'd be like, well, just use soy flour and tapioca flour. And those are basically 2 whole foods. They are somewhat processed because they've been turned into flour, but at least they're still like the whole tapioca or the whole soybean just ground down and turned into flour, where you're maintaining all those other nutrients, the fiber, the protein that are contained in the food. Um, and those are the things that they take out to make the white bread taste so good. L. Smith says, any advice for people who have absorption issues that lead to vitamin deficiency? Um, that's a very kind of specific question. I can't really think of a like very like generalized answer for that. Um, I will say though that in um nutrition land, we have this concept of bioavailability. Bioavailability essentially means how well does your body break down the food and how well does it absorb the nutrients? Or how well can it use the different nutrients that are in the food? So when we think about, taking a vitamin, a lot of us have heard that, oh, if you take the vitamin, your body can only absorb so much of it, and you're going to end up just peeing out the rest. And it's kind of true. There's only um, there's only certain amounts of nutrients and certain forms of nutrients that your body's going to be able to take in or be able to retain. The same way that at a certain point your body starts rejecting the sugar, the same thing can happen with nutrients. So, when we're talking about bioavailability as a general concept, the most bioavailable form for you to take in any nutrient is from the normal food from which it came. So if we're talking about, okay, rather than we're going to grind up a bunch of kale and we're going to extract the nutrients we want and then put those nutrients into a little pill. Actually, your preferred, your body's preferred way of getting those nutrients is from eating the actual food itself. So rather than taking synthetic vitamins or supplements, I would I kind of tend to encourage people to just spend their money on eating healthier foods instead. Now, it's not to say that certain people don't need certain supplements or need to add certain things. Maybe there's something that they need that they're not getting from their diet. But as a general concept, the most bioavailable form of the nutrients is in the food that it grew from the ground in. And then the sooner that we can eat it from the time it was picked, the more nutritious it is. So this is why I like, going to farmers markets and places where your food isn't traveling for weeks and weeks to get to the grocery store. Um, Things are more bioavailable when they're closest to their natural state. Now, as far as someone who has absorption issues, I really don't know specifically like what types of conditions lead to that. So I don't really know how to speak to that. I would also want to know if there's a specific vitamin that you're deficient in that that's problematic. So Um, so yeah, so maybe more either more detail on your question or more specifics on your question. Lucy Grant, I'm a dancer specializing in ballet. Have you got any yoga tips for when my feet hurt? It's so funny. I was kind of halfway thinking, like, oh, it'd be cool if I could set up a yoga mat and even like do some little like yoga poses in the chat. I'm not quite, I don't think I haven't, I basically have to push the desk into the middle of the living room in order to make enough space for myself back here. But what I can do, um, anyways, okay. So all right. Well, foot thing is going to be difficult, but I will get to that in a second. So she's saying um yoga tips for foot pain, any special types of exercises or yoga moves that you can recommend. This is actually, I'll show you guys. This is my yoga ottoman because I like having a little ottoman as a prop. And I'm have gonna make some videos showing how I do it. Um And then inside of my yoga storage ottoman is my yoga props because it's amazing. You should have yoga props inside of a yoga ottoman. Um, I also have a little strap. A yoga strap is nice. If you don't have a yoga strap, literally dog leash, pair of yoga leggings, um, a belt, obviously. Um, but a yoga strap is really, really a nice thing. Um, if you're a ballet dancer, presumably you're doing tons and tons of stretches already. You're doing um, lots of different types of movements. I mean, the first thing that I would kind of talk about related to foot pain would be stretching the hamstrings because it's just kind of this forgotten area. But if you're a ballet dancer, then you probably do a lot of hamstring stretches already, and maybe that doesn't actually apply. Um, there's a hmm, ah, mm, it's so funny. I really like I realize now I have made a blunder in saying I would talk about yoga and not being able to like do any yoga. Okay, so yogi toe stretch. If you put in yogi toe stretch, um, here's one by Eckhart Yoga. She's fantastic. So essentially, if you're kind of in child's pose and tuck your toes under, and then play with bringing your weight back onto your toes. So if you look at this, I just searched yogi toe stretch and found this Eckhart Yoga doing it. She's sitting on her heels. Now, that is a super intense toe stretch. I would start by like, if you're just in downward dog and then tuck your toes under and just play with pulling your weight back over the toes, it's going to be super intense. And then over time, you may get to the point where you can actually full on sit on your feet. And then just know that if you are doing that and you start kind of feeling cramping in the feet, you just want to go slowly between coming in and out of the stretch. So sometimes we feel like, oh, it hurts this way. And then we want to like stretch the other way really intensely. But it's going to be a lot more healthy on the muscles and all of the different nerves involved, which is why we're feeling pain if we have a little bit more time between it. So if you're in this little like toe stretch or sitting on top of the heels with the toes bent under, um, just as you transition out of it, breathe for a second, straighten the toes. If you want to come back and then put the tops of the feet flat on the floor and lift yourself up on the tops of the feet, that feels insane. You probably already do that as a ballet dancer. I feel like I'm probably telling you something you're like, "Yeah, I already do that. Why are you telling me this?" Um, but this would be the first thing that I would think of for foot pain. The other thing I would talk about is noticing when you're standing, what they call pronation. So if this is your foot and this is the arch of your foot on the inside, this arch over time starts to fall, and we really want to strengthen that arch. Now, again, as a ballet dancer, you probably have really strengthened that arch a lot. But essentially, as you're standing, it's almost like you're thinking about lifting the arch up off the floor. And one of the concepts we have in yoga is pada bandha. It's a foot lock. So the different locks in yoga are we're not really locking something, but it's kind of this concept that we use to help feel into the body more. So the concept of pada bandha is that you think about the bottom of your foot. So if like here's my I've got really long toes, but y'all get the idea. So the kind of three corners of the foot, so on one edge and then under the pinky toe, and then you can either think of like the center of the heel is the one spot, or you could think of it as four. But as you're standing on your foot, you're thinking about engaging through those four or three corners of the foot and then letting the arch lift a little bit. You can even set a pen underneath the arch of your foot to kind of help you feel it lifting. But getting that arch nice and strong is another thing that can help with foot pain. As a ballet dancer, you probably have like wicked strong arches. So then maybe the next step that you want to do is massaging into the arch or stretching the arch. So that little yogi toe stretch I was talking about a second ago is a really nice way of kind of like full on stretching out the arch of the foot. I would also encourage you um if you want to practice your like standing on one foot and then doing the lifting of the arch over the pen. Y'all maybe like do stuff like that in ballet. I took some ballet as like a little child, but I certainly don't like remember any of it or have have any like specific ballet poses that I can recall from it or ballet exercises. But yogi toe stretch. There's also kind of a variation of that where you can actually balance on one foot. That might not necessarily feel better, but strengthening those muscles that help you do that pose could actually help with pain in a way. Do you often lay with your feet up? One of the greatest things, so what we would call legs up the wall pose, where basically you're laying flat on your back and then you put your legs up a wall. That can feel really nice. What I like to do is legs up the couch or legs up the ottoman. So rather than having the legs flat against the wall, your legs are bent and laid on top of something. So if I'm like laying on the floor and put my legs up on the couch, now you're able to have the feet elevated, have that kind of beneficial inversion effect. But because the legs are allowed to be bent, it tends to be a little bit easier on the low back, a little more relaxing. And a lot of us have really tight hamstrings. So putting the legs flat against the wall can be a little uncomfortable. So letting the legs be bent over a couch or an ottoman or whatever can be really, really nice and a little bit more therapeutic, so to speak. So legs up the wall, legs up the bench. If you're doing one of those things, then you can also kind of do figure four style. So then you've crossed your foot over your knee, over your leg, starting to bring your foot towards you, and you can massage your foot, massage the bottom of your foot from that position. And so in that figure four, you're getting really nice little hip stretch. It's also a really great way as you're just kind of laying there, if you want to do a little like self foot massage and just stretching the feet. A really great thing you can do. I'm not going to do it right now, but taking your fingers in between all your toes. Taking your fingers in between all your toes, and then it's just kind of I don't think it has a name or anything, but that can be a really nice thing for the feet as well. Feet up the bench. Let's see. Jules is asking adaptive thermogenesis or slowed metabolism due to caloric restriction. Okay. All right. Well, I'm so glad that you are in recovery of an eating disorder. I know that is a very, very intense thing to go through. So just know my heart is with you through all of that. Um, when it comes to uh, big changes that we're making in our bodies, it's really understandable that we're going to, kind of end up with maybe we put on weight or something's changing. We're having like big changes in the body. I would just start by saying it's okay. Give your body some time to just adjust and know that when we're in those big periods of adjustment and changing things, the body's kind of like pinging around and it doesn't quite know what to do. And it just takes a bit of time to like get used to the norm and settle back in. So there's a good chance that your weight's going to normalize just as your body kind of gets through this big transitional period. Now, adaptive thermogenesis, I don't necessarily think that I don't necessarily think that your um, metabolism has been slowed. I feel like it's a good way of, kind of explaining, like, why you've ended up, gaining some extra weight, but it's not that you have actually like, had a permanent effect on your body's ability to metabolize food, and now you've slowed your metabolism. Although, there's a lot of people I think that want us to feel that way or want us to feel like, "Oh, our metabolism is this, our metabolism is that." Your metabolism is not a, like, concrete thing in the body that can be, like, tweaked and changed and whatever. It's more of, like, your body's response to the things that you're doing. So, your activity level, what you're eating, how often you're eating, there's all these different factors that are actually going to, you know, uh, influence the way that your body breaks down foods, decides to store some of the sugar, decides to not store some of the sugar. I think that if you're coming through healing from an eating disorder, your body is probably going, "Oh my gosh, we're going to hold on to all of this nourishment for dear life." That is a natural reaction of the body. Don't be upset at your body for wanting to hold on to that. As your body learns that to accept your new way of eating, your new approach, and it begins to feel a little bit more safe in knowing that it has consistent nourishment coming in, eating on a regular basis, eating on a regular schedule, it's going to let go of some of that fat, and it's actually going to cause your metabolism to normalize. Um, but anytime we're kind of putting the body through changes and certainly big dietary changes one way or another, I feel natural for the body to have a slowed metabolism in a sense, as the body is just trying to figure out what its new normal is going to be. Um, I don't know if I answered your question. Let me know, Jules. Yeah, there's always tons of studies, right? There's always tons of studies on either side of anything we're looking at, either, you know, one way or another. I think that there's a lot of people who end up with something to gain, whether it is they're selling a program or they're selling a product or they just, so yeah, here's someone talking about adaptive thermogenesis. I feel that there's There's a lot of complexity in the body. There's a lot of different ways that your body's gonna respond to things happening. I mean, just the last 3 years of what we have all been through together has been crazy. I mean, I know that I can consciously tell, like, wow, this has been a crazy 3 years and like, holy moly. But our bodies have also been experiencing this in their own way. And they don't necessarily have the conscious knowledge that we have of all the things we're going through. So I think just I feel that, again, maybe 10 years or 20 years from now, they'll be able to look back and observe what I'm saying about this time period. I feel that in the last 3 years, there's probably been a lot of different health issues, health problems, weight gain issues just related to the stress. People who were maybe eating the same way they always did, but then just from the heightened stress that we were all thrust into, suddenly the body's not responding in the same way. Maybe the metabolism changes, so to speak, or the way that the body is storing fat changes. I believe we've probably all put on weight in the last 3 years simply from our bodies being in a state of stress and panic. The body doesn't know what we know in our subconscious, but the body is definitely recognizing the additional stress that we've experienced. So I think that's just I just wanna to say that as a, um, kind of, overarching, grace that we give ourselves during this time, that, we've all been through a crazy thing together, and we're maybe about to go through it again, right? Because I know that it's looking like it's heading that way. When we're living in a constant state of stress, it is going to be very difficult for the body to burn fat and to you know what it's supposed to do, for it to know what to expect. Um yeah, so okay, heard in famous studies, but some people say it's BS. I mean, it does seem like there's, reading what this woman Kathy is saying about it, you know, there's a let's see, adaptive thermogenesis involves interaction between a number of hormones, including hormones that affect your appetite, insulin, thyroid hormones, stress hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, epinephrine, etc. I mean, that is, I agree with that. Or maybe I wouldn't say adaptive thermogenesis. That just sounds a little too I mean, it's in a way like people like want to come up with a word that's going to confuse everybody so that you have to relegate to what this person tells you because you're not going to be able to just understand the concept. I feel like if somebody's trying to tell you, "Oh, this concept is too complex for you. You just need to do what I tell you." I don't know. I don't know. Gives me the bad jujus. So Lucy, thank you so much. Lucy says, you've been very helpful. I will subscribe and look for your videos. Yes, I will do some yoga stuff soon. And I will maybe even do one, try to do one specifically for foot pain since we were talking about that. Even people who aren't ballet dancers tend to have some achy feet. But certainly, man, I cannot even imagine. I'll be honest, just watching people do ballet, I'm like, ooh, 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 it hurts. It hurts. Um, I've always believed that ballet dancers are like the prime athlete because it's one thing to be an athlete who's like huffing and puffing and they're like, "Urgh," and they're like, clearly being very, very athletic and working really hard, like a football player. But to be doing something that is just as athletic, if not more athletic than playing football, but have this most graceful look on your face like you're doing nothing at all, making it look so simple and easy and delicate. I mean, that is an amazing work of athleticism. Um, so yes, I have mad respect for ballet dancers. Um, I know that on the previous channel, which shall not be named, there were several people who did videos about foot pain, yoga for foot issues. I think we even had a few ballet people that made videos over the years. I don't know if we ever did one about foot pain, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's one up there. Um, there were definitely a lot of great classes that that I filmed over the years with people. Um, most of whom have not gone on to continue doing videos, but there are a few. So if y'all remember Elise, Elise Fitness was her little show name. She has her own yoga channel now. Um, let me find. She has only posted a few videos so far, but yeah, it's just called Elise Fitness. I will even maybe try to link to her channel or something from my channel. Um, but so she's got 3 videos up there right now. There's a good one, um, all levels flow for hips and hamstrings. That might be a nice little, like, ballet dancer class. And I feel like anything yoga is typically gonna end up having something for the feet as well. Um, estrogen dominance. Lordy Lou. So yes, estrogen dominance is something that, I mean, I've been hearing about for a really, really long time. And then in recent years, it's just become more and more common, right? People with different issues related um, to hormone imbalance or whatever you want to call it. So PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, probably the most common one, at least as far as things that I mentioned that people have heard of before. When I was in high school, my best friend in high school had PCOS and she had to have surgery and it was super intense and scary. And I mean, at that point, she was the only person I had known that had it. Well, that was like 20 years ago. Now it's all over the place. It's incredibly common. So, estrogen dominance, let's see what it says. A hormone imbalance where you have too much estrogen in relation to progesterone. This can be caused by an overproduction of estrogen, changes in estrogen metabolism, poor detoxification, gut imbalances, chronic stress, or exposure to endocrine disrupting toxins. And estrogen dominance linked to many conditions, one of which is PCOS. So there's a couple of different questions that could be asked. Why are there so many endocrine disrupting chemicals that we are exposed to? What is an endocrine disrupting chemical? Well, your endocrine system is your hormone system. So, endocrine disruptors are things that interfere with your body's ability to manage its hormones. So, hormones are um, essentially the way that our body communicates with itself, right? So it's very, very important that the body is able to maintain a healthy system of communication, you might say. Um, so when it comes to these oestrogenic chemicals, so these are chemicals that act like estrogen. There are so many of them now. It's actually like quite a long list. I don't know if I haven't searched for this in a long time. Um, but chemicals that have an estrogen-like effect, but then they're not estrogen, tend to have a negative effect on the endocrine system. So it leaves this question, why are there so many of these oestrogenic chemicals that are being used? How is it actually affecting us? I would argue that the prevalence of increased endocrine issues like PCOS is evidence of the fact that these oestrogenic chemicals are having negative effects on us. Um, I I believe that this probably honestly something that applies to me as well. I believe that I mean, not just as a woman and all women are affected. Um, but there's there's definitely a lot of different evidence out there that these different hormonal issues are, can kind of end up causing all numbers of different things. PCOS just kind of a common example, but migraine headaches are a big one. Hormonal migraines, I think, is uh, something that's become increasingly common, again, with the prevalence of these different chemicals that have been, whether they're added in the foods or added in our skincare products. I actually did bring my little makeup bag over here 'cause y'all wanna talk about skin stuff. Um, but there's a lot of just different weird endocrine disrupting chemicals. The bisphenol A that we were talking about earlier, that's found in the plastic water bottles, that's an endocrine disruptor. So then you have this question like, okay, well, if everything that we're using is packaged in plastic, and then the water we're drinking is packaged in plastic, and the thing that we store our food in the container in the refrigerator is often made of plastic. It just has, I mean, certainly for me, has kind of like raised my antennas, you could say, on this issue, and it definitely feels that it is of increasing prevalence for people to be having these issues. And largely, I think that it's only a matter of time before they're going to end up having to radically change the chemicals that they're using in things, because we're finding out that they're just between the health effects. I'm not even getting into the environmental effects of what all the plastic is doing. Let's not even get started on that. But I definitely think that estrogen dominance is a big factor contributing to a lot of issues we're having, and it all comes, in my mind, back to this concept of just trying to eat natural foods, eat things in their natural state. If you're avoiding things that are highly processed, if trying to you know, avoid things that are, anything we're eating in like fast food restaurants and stuff like that typically is going to end up having a lot of potential exposure to some of these different chemicals that have been associated with estrogen dominance. Yowzers. All right, you guys. So I'm scrolling here to see if there's any questions that I've missed. Okay, we did intermittent fasting. We talked about the water, talked about the keto breads, some yoga exercises for foot pain. Okay. I think that I think that I've answered all the questions that are in here. There there's just so much out there now. In the world of health and nutrition, I have just been constantly um, floored by, I don't know, not only the volume of people that are out there talking on these different topics or sharing things, but there's definitely a huge amount of people trying to sell stuff, whether it's a specific diet, they wrote a book about a diet, they made a this about a whatever. Certainly when it comes to supplement related things, I think there's like way too many supplements and products that are out there now. But even if somebody doesn't have a product, there's other ways that they can monetize their, whatever you want to call it, monetize their, uh, I mean, if you write a book about your diet, have you monetized the diet? Are you really just teaching people about the diet? I mean, I feel that there just has to be a happy balance somewhere in there between what people are doing to just try and educate people. And as consumers, we just need to be aware that sometimes people have a motive that is monetary, and certainly when we're talking about the big food companies, they definitely got that monetary incentive. One of the things I think is really interesting, and forgive me if you're hearing me repeat this, but in the world of those big food conglomerates and corporations, they use the term stomach share to talk about us. Stomach share. And to them, that is how much of our stomachs do they get to fill with their food. Stomachs. How much of our stomachs do they get to fill with their food? That's the stomach share. And the goal for any of those companies is to take up as much stomach share as possible. So McDonald's, they are trying to get like every customer to come in 3 times a day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you are eating all of your meals at McDonald's, I mean, you're like McDonald's wet dream. And there's a lot of people who are living that way. I don't know what the numbers are, but there's a considerable number of people who they go to McDonald's 3 times a day. Um, and that is McDonald's goal, right? McDonald's goal is not to make something as healthy as possible. Their goal is to get us to keep coming back and eating as much of the food as possible. And they actually benefit when we overeat the food and eat even more than we need to. So, in food science, there's a concept called vanishing caloric density. And it is a technique that they purposefully use to trick us into eating more food. So, a great example is when you're eating like any type of chips, potato chips, Cheetos, etc. Those foods are designed with this concept of vanishing caloric density. And what that means is that the caloric density vanishes to your brain. Your brain can't tell how many calories you've eaten. That is the concept of vanishing caloric density. And if the brain has a hard time keeping track of how many calories it's eaten, you're just going to keep eating. So when you sit there and you feel like you can eat a giant bag of cheese puffs or something and still feel hungry and you don't understand why, it's literally because of this technique they invented called vanishing caloric density. And they literally designed the food to trick your brain into not realizing how much it had eaten so that you would eat way more calories than you need. So they remove the fiber from the foods because this is another thing with white bread. Not only does removing the fiber help the white bread taste a little sweeter, a little more sugary, more starchy, but removing the fiber also challenges your body's ability to keep track of how much you've eaten. So, one of the other benefits, I keep coming back to my little I'm a great artiste here, but we were talking about our different blood sugar spikes. So here we've got the blood sugar spike when you eat something with a lot of refined sugar. Very little fiber, little protein, little healthy fat, right? This is a lot of sugar and it causes a very quick, very steep spike in the blood sugar. Whereas if we have this concept of complex carbohydrates and just eating natural foods, normal foods, a normal food that comes out of the ground has fiber, protein, usually there's some micronutrients like minerals. Maybe there's also some fats depending on what we're eating, right? But the presence of the protein, fat, and the fiber is part of what helps slow the spike. And this is part of the concept of keto. And it is reasonable for them to say, oh, we're going to make something keto and we'll put more fats and fiber in it to slow the spike. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but it doesn't mean that everything keto is automatically healthy either. But vanishing caloric density, right? Is like this guy. Like you've eaten it really fast, it spikes your blood sugar up, but there's not very much fiber and protein. So even though your blood sugar has gone up a lot, you had a lot of calories, right? The body panics, your insulin comes in, it lowers your blood sugar. Well, now you're hungry again really soon. This is like ideal scene for people who all they see you as a stomach share, right? This is ideal scene for them. They want you to be hungry as much of the day as possible. They don't want your hunger to be satiated because then you're not coming back through the drive-through. So, from the perspective of fast food manufacturers or junk food manufacturers, this is what they want. They want a big blood sugar spike. They want you to get hungry again really, really quickly. If you're eating something and your blood sugar rises slowly and then falls more slowly, well, look how much time you just went before you got hungry again. Okay. Jules, have you heard of earthing, grounding, i.e., being food out, aka being barefoot outside? Yes, I have. I definitely have. I've heard of several people talking about this. Are you asking, is it legit? Is it worth doing? Excuse me. It's definitely something that you hear a lot about in the world of, I guess, holistic health and wellness, you could say. I think there's a lot of different benefits to getting outside, being outdoors, whether it's just getting fresh air, getting some sunlight, is always beneficial. Now, this idea of the energy coming in through the bottom of your foot when you're barefoot, I don't really know. But I know that when I go walking outside barefoot and hanging out in the grass and being outside, like I definitely feel better. Certainly all throughout our ancestors walking around. I mean, I don't know. When was the advent of shoes? We've been walking around in shoes for probably a few hundred years. When were shoes invented? But but the idea, okay, 40,000 years ago. But when we think about, different obviously different parts of the world, there will be certain people who either maybe walk barefoot their whole lives or most of their lives or most of the year, or maybe there's only certain parts of the year where the weather necessitates them wearing shoes. Um, Even though shoes been around for a really long time, I would say that the prevalence of shoes is probably not 40,000 years, right? Like 40,000 years ago, did every single person have a pair of shoes that they wore every single time they were outdoors? Probably not. Um, so just thinking about how our ancestors survived and what type of earth they were walking around on, I think that that is very kind of important to consider, right? And I think that humans historically are definitely more accustomed to being barefoot, being on the grass, interacting with the earth. I do believe that there's benefits of that happening. Um, Whether or not there's literally this interaction coming between our feet and the ground beneath it, it probably is true. I'm not going to sit here and be like, yes, it's a 100% fact. I have not personally scientifically verified it. But I'm sure that there's, you know, I can observe benefits of doing it. I would imagine that that is probably something that's happening because we're constantly exchanging energy with things. So why wouldn't we exchange energy with the ground beneath our feet when we're walking barefoot? Um, I think probably, I don't know, when you look at the world that we live in and where most of us in big cities and there's concrete and lots of buildings. I mean, there's so many different things that are kind of taking us out of nature, separating us from nature or from the earth, you could say. So is it beneficial for someone in a big city to make some time each day or a couple times a week to get some time in the grass and being barefoot? I would say it's certainly not going to hurt anything. And largely, it's probably on a person to person basis how much of a difference you're going to feel. But this idea that we could get closer to the natural circadian rhythm, get closer to the natural rhythm of the sun and the moon and wakefulness and sleep, like this uh closeness that we have with nature, I do think is highly linked to how we're feeling and how our bodies are able to handle stress. So, um, I feel very, very fortunate that I live in a place, even though Austin is kind of a big city now, we still have a lot of green space, a lot of parks, a lot of places where you can still be amongst lots of trees and be in the grass. And I think that is definitely, definitely beneficial. Um, there's probably a lot of different things about being in a big city that are negative for us. Maybe the least of which is not being barefoot on the ground enough. Jules, I mean, girl, anything's related, really. Um, anything's related. Cell phone exposure. I mean, yeah, I definitely think that cell phone radiation is harmful. Now, I say that with my cell phone sitting here right next to me. Okay. I did buy a Defender Shield case for my phone. Unfortunately, the it just has the back the back Defender Shield piece of it now because the little case that it was in kind of fell apart because I used it for so long. Um, I mean, haven't they found now there's like prevalence of people that like get like cancers behind their ears, and then it turns out that they had that little ear Bluetooth thing or whatever, and I feel like I saw that a couple years ago and was thinking like, "Oh, Jesus," because I always had a weird feeling about that thing that people keep on their keep on their ears, and then anything that's like Bluetooth or whatever, I mean, it's constantly sending out a little signal trying to link with something. So if you've got like a Bluetooth thing that's like right there constantly trying to make connection with your phone or with whatever might be, that definitely I think is you know, something I personally never going to wear. Um, I don't know if I have enough. Uh, I don't know if I would ever actually tell someone else not to wear one. Certainly for the four of us who are in here right now, I would say I would discourage it. It's just one of those things that we're not really gonna know. We're not really gonna know for a long time. But, you know, everything's on a 10 or 20-year delay, right? So 10 or 20 years from now, we'll really find out how the cell phones were affecting us. Um, I think about the things that I was talking about 10 years ago, which a lot of y'all were watching, and a lot of those things are just now 10 years later starting to finally come into the mainstream, and I hear people talking about them and they've been largely accepted. So, like partially hydrogenated fats was one of the things that I was talking about in my senior thesis paper in college. And so that's the trans fats. And everyone was like, oh, partially hydrogenated fats. Oh, this is so good. And because they were trying to demonize the saturated fats. Well, then after a couple years, they ended up finding out that the um, partially hydrogenated oils. Is that what I was saying? I think I might have said something else. Partially hydrogenated oils. Those are the trans fats. Years later, they ended up coming out and saying, "Oh, those are the absolute worst type of fats of all the types of fats." Well, didn't y'all like promote the partially hydrogenated oils because y'all were trying to tell us they were so much better? So there's always this lag on things, right? Vaping is another great example, right? Um, Thankfully, the turnover time on them discovering the dangers of vaping is has been a lot quicker compared to some of these other things. Um, but it's just sort of a, uh, you know, kind of time delay. How long before we're actually going to get the answer to something? It's kind of an interesting question. Jules, you know what? I will go ahead and leave this stream up on the channel. I feel like I'm just sitting here rambling, but I will go ahead and leave it on the channel if you wanted to come back to it. I think I'm probably going to go ahead and call it for today. It looks like we've been on for about 2 hours. I feel like I've just been sitting here rambling. If people have other questions, I'll be happy to stay. But Jules, thank you for being here. You had some really awesome questions as well. So thank you for your awesome questions. And I will look forward to seeing you super, super soon. Maybe Wednesday. I did bring a few items. So since we're coming up on Halloween time, man, the Halloween candy. I mean, the high fructose corn syrup at this point, I'm like, that's the least of my concerns. The high fructose corn syrup and the sugar content, I mean, they're bad, really, really bad, but the least of my concerns now. Because unfortunately, right, we talked about the artificial sweeteners, acesulfame potassium, sucralose, and aspartame, but hardly anyone uses aspartame anymore because aspartame became the most complained about food chemical to the FDA. So you don't see aspartame a lot, but you will see those artificial sweeteners. And I see them in pretty much, I don't know, I feel like I see them in almost everything. Like the juices, the yogurts, the whatever, certainly the candies. Okay, so I got some candies that I would eat. Unsweetened chocolate, peanut butter. It does have the allulose, right, which is a sweetener extracted from normal foods. I would rather them just use the maple syrup than use the allulose extracted from the maple syrup. But okay. So peanut butter, allulose, cocoa butter, cane sugar. Got it. Organic maple sugar, peanut flour, non-fat milk powder, sea salt, sunflower lecithin, and vanilla. But I was just going to pull up a Reese's and see what it says. I meant to have this pulled up before we started, but of course. Dun, 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 dun. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Milk chocolate, sugar, cocoa butter chocolate, skim milk, milk fat. I mean, that's interesting, right? Why are they going to put in skim milk and milk fat? Why not just use milk? Lactose, soy lecithin, PGPR, which is one of our freaking crazy preservatives, polyglycerol polyricinoleate, PGPR, an ingredient commonly used as a water in oil type emulsifier. Okay, sorry, emulsifier, not preservative. But it's just one of those weird things, right? Ain't got no PGPR in here. There's no emulsifiers in here. They just used the natural foods and guess what? They mixed together naturally. What else is over here? Yeah, high fructose corn syrup. You know, because then they're taking a corn. And now corn, that's what I was trying to think of. When we were talking about our complex carbohydrates. Corn is a good one. That just looks weird. I can't even spell very good. It looks like calm. Corn. Um, so corn, very healthy food, extremely healthy food. Now, what happens when you take the corn and you extract just the sweetness out of the corn? And then to make that high fructose corn syrup, not only have they extracted the sweetness out of the corn, but now they've actually concentrated the sweetness into the syrup. So that's why literally a lot of foods will even have corn syrup as an ingredient, but then they'll also have high fructose corn syrup as an ingredient. So it's just kind of comparing, right? We can think about how, like, we've got like step one, the corn grows out of the ground, right? And then and eating the corn as it grows out of the ground, now I do recommend cooking it, husking it, etc. But eating the corn as it comes out of the ground is actually very healthy. I consider that a very healthful food. And I would even say that um, you know, in the keto world where they're so scared of starches and carbs and oh god, I would even say you eating a serving of corn, a couple servings of corn. I would prefer that to you eating one of those weird keto breads with a bunch of weird ingredients and who freaking knows what in it. Um, actually don't think I need this light anymore. Um, so yeah, the high fructose corn syrup is definitely on the list of IBS triggers. I've definitely seen that as well. And um it's just so interesting how the desire for them to sweeten things has become so intense that they're like, "Ah, even the pure sugar isn't sweet enough." Like, that in and of itself is kind of an interesting conundrum in my book, if I must say. Um, I hate that. Yeah, I was just reading something yesterday. I don't know where it was. I think it was on my phone. I was reading something about IBS and different things related to it, and that may be something that I will try to do a whole video on. So I think there's a lot of different factors, and I know how frustrating that is when you're trying to figure out, like, what can I eat? What can I not eat? And then it feels like your body is just having like almost random reactions to different things. It's frustrating when it becomes difficult to like nail down what's the trigger, what's the cause, what is, what do I actually need to do to like make these modifications in my diet. So yeah, I think that again, that's one of those things that's become so overwhelmingly common now too. It's not something that we had even really heard of. I don't know if I'd even heard of that back, 20 years ago. But then over the last 10, 15 years, started out as something that, kind of rare. And now it feels like all the time I'm encountering people that are struggling with that. Um, I would just say I think part of it is, all the Franken foods in general. Like they're like, we got to nail down and figure out which chemical it is that's screwing everybody up. And it's like, well, could it be the fact that you've put like thousands and thousands of chemicals in the things that we're eating for now the past 30 years? And so then it becomes difficult to isolate what is the cause? What is the problem? Is it that there is this one trigger of the problem and you could isolate the trigger and solve the problem? Or is there something in the underlying problem itself that we can do, resolve the underlying problem, and then you don't have to live with all these crazy restrictions on what you're trying to eat? Um, Probably the overarching recommendation would just be trying to opt for natural foods as much as possible. So whether it's the high fructose corn syrup or the this ingredient or the that ingredient, um, if you're just kind of trying to um, avoid those weird mystery ingredients in general, which I'm sure you're trying to do because of like trying to live your life. But then you're faced with this, okay, well, I'm hungry. Now my options of the things I can eat are getting smaller and smaller and smaller because everywhere we go, they're using all of these different freaking who knows what. So I feel for you so much. That must be so frustrating. Um, I believe in a brain gut connection for sure. I had bad anxiety years ago, which I think started it. Anxiety is generally better now. Interesting. Yeah, I've definitely and the brain gut connection, that was something that they talked about in my holistic health coaching program that I did, all of those years ago. Um, yeah, stress and anxiety definitely can be triggers. I think we all know that, whether we've been diagnosed with IBS or not. We can recognize that stress and anxiety, uh, you know, uh, help our gut not function as well, contribute to our gut not functioning as well. So it's a very interesting to examine that relationship between the two. Yes. Oh my gosh. So let's see, what do we got here? Another example. So when I was doing curbside pickup, they replaced one of my I was getting a cream of chicken soup, but of course they replaced the one I wanted with the Campbell's. So now I have a Campbell's soup I can show y'all. So just comparing our cream of chicken soup here. So this Pacific Organic Foods one, chicken stock, cornstarch, chicken, cream, rice flour, sea salt, chicken fat, garlic powder, onion powder. That sounds like something that a recipe. That sounds like a recipe that I would follow. Arguably, why am I buying this? I could just get the ingredients and make it myself. But sometimes it's easier to just buy the thing, right? But the bottom line is they're all foods. One of the things that I think about when you're looking at food labels and you're like, is it a chemical? Is it a food? Ask yourself, if I put this word in on Google Images, would it bring up a picture of a food or would it bring up a picture of a chemical structure? So in the Campbell's, we've got chicken stock, modified cornstarch. So here we've got they took the corn, which is a healthy food, healthy vegetable, took the food, took out the starch from the corn, and then they modified it somehow. Okay, modified cornstarch, vegetable oil, cream, wheat flour, chicken meat, chicken fat, salt, whey, dried chicken, monosodium glutamate, soy protein concentrate, water, yeast extract, natural flavoring, beta carotene for color, soy protein isolate, sodium phosphate, celery extract, onion extract, butter, garlic juice concentrate. So monosodium glutamate definitely stands out there, that MSG, one that we've kind of had our attention brought to, our awareness brought to. I definitely go out of my way to avoid things with MSG in them. Um, when they need diabetic rats to do experiments on in food safety trials, one of the ways they create a diabetic rat is by giving it MSG. So So I try to avoid MSG. I don't like it. So we had the modified cornstarch, MSG. Um, okay, so whey. We see the whey, right? Here's another time where they've taken a food that grew out of the earth and extracted one of the things out of it. Whey protein is incredibly popular. A lot of people will put, scoops and scoops of whey protein in things. I Once again, my holistic little, holistic thing or whatever, I'm like, "Ooh, I don't think that isolating the whey out of the food is good for you." If you just so whey comes from milk, right? Eating her curds and whey. Um, so it's like how much I was gonna say, how much milk do you need to get enough whey to put in something? But then I was like, well, I don't wanna just say that, that sounds silly. Whey is the liquid remaining after milk has been curdled and strained. It is a byproduct of the manufacturing of cheese or casein and has several commercial uses. Sweet whey is a byproduct resulting from the manufacture of rennet, which is you know, types of cheese and stuff. So yes, it's this interesting thing, like, yeah. If you yeah, I'm just like, because I think about the giant tubs of, like, whey protein, like, how much milk did it take for them to, like, extract that much whey protein out of it? It's bizarre. So, things with whey added to them, I tend to be like, "Ooh, no." Now, if it had milk in it, I'd be like, "Okay, cool. Milk is a food. Milk is an ingredient. Milk is an actual food." And this does have cream in it too, right? Yeah. But still, right? Then they've like, "Oh, okay, well, we're also gonna add a little bit of this extra milk protein that we extracted out." So, modified cornstarch, monosodium glutamate, whey, yeast extract. Yeast extract is one of the potential kind of pseudonyms of MSG. So not only do they actually have literal MSG, they also have yeast extract, which is probably just another form of essentially the same thing. And then we've got soy protein concentrate and soy protein isolate. So we have two different chemicals that are extracted from the soybean. And just to reiterate what I said a while ago, soybeans I consider a healthy food. A soybean can be good for you, but soy protein isolate, soy protein whatever, soy protein concentrate, soy protein isolate, I mean, like, it's just this is in my mind, this is the essence of the problem, right? Um, when we talk about the addition of excess chemicals, a lot of times people would kinda get on my back like, "Yeah, you can't just say that all chemicals are bad and, oh, it's you can't just like it's a over, simplification to just hate on all food chemicals." I don't hate all food chemicals. But what I have learned is that there are so many food chemicals. Like when you look at the list, when you go to the FDA.gov and you look at the list, like there are so many. You realize there's no way that any person could actually keep track of all of them, actually research all of them, keep track of which ones are dangerous and which ones are okay. There's just too many of them. So for me, conceptually, I would rather just try to eat the natural whole foods as a general approach rather than try to keep track of 1,000 different food chemicals so that as I'm reading the label, I can be like, oh, well, that one's okay. Oh, well, that one's just an emulsifier. That one's okay. Oh, well, that one's just a color. That one's okay. I don't have time to Google what every single ingredient is in every single food. Someone has been asking me for a long time to do a video about water in chicken nuggets for McDonald's because I did that WTF is in a Big Mac years ago, right? I mean, that was a very illuminating experience for me. Because actually, when I did that video, I actually did spend hours reading through the ingredients and then every single one, copy, paste, Google search, figure out what it is, write down what it is. And I was so just appalled by like the sheer volume of different chemicals. And then once you just read about a couple of them, you're like, wow, man, I don't, not gonna pick and choose between like, "Oh, this chemical is okay, but that chemical is bad. Oh, I don't wanna eat this one." Like, my take home message was, it is easier to just try and avoid these food chemicals as much as possible. Just try to eat real foods, and largely that's ended up saving me a lot of time. Um, back 10 years ago, I back when I used to actually go to the grocery store before COVID age, um, going to the grocery store, I would spend like 4 hours in the grocery store because I would actually stand there reading all of the ingredients and like standing there with 2 different things and, like, comparing the ingredients. Um, we didn't really have, like, cell phones with immediate internet in them back then. I couldn't actually just stand there in the store and Google all of the ingredients as I was standing there. I did do that for a time, but, essentially, it just took me reading about a couple of ingredients. I mean, and honestly, when I say that, I read about a lot of ingredients over the years, a lot, to the point that I just ended up realizing, like, this is too much to keep track of. There's too many to keep track of. Rather than trying to keep track of which ones are okay and which ones aren't okay, I decided, hey, I'm just going to try to avoid all of them altogether. And that's kind of what I recommend to y'all, right? Because so I don't want to be like, okay, well, now here's my advice. Go spend 8 hours in the grocery store because you're going to have to stand there and Google every single ingredient on every single product that you want to buy. No, that's not very realistic. Who is that realistic for? No one. um, okay, so I said I was gonna close and then I went on freaking blabbing for another however long. Um, I'm not seeing any other questions in here, so but this has been so much fun. I hope that this information was helpful, and I do intend to post some real videos on this channel as well. I need a clone or something. Um, yeah, I need a video editing clone. That'd be great. Actually, if I had a clone, she could just sit there and like only video edit. She wouldn't have to like do anything else. Anyways, so oh lordy McLulu. So, Mel, thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it a day, but we should do this again. I guess I'll try. I realized, okay, so last night we got done with the live chat and I was hungry, right? So I ended up just reheating some leftovers and it didn't take as long as if I would have like made the ravioli lasagna that I was talking about. But by the time that I was, like, done eating and then I came in here and I was like, "Okay, I gotta just, like, clean up my set a little bit." So, like, all of the ASMR stuff is, like um, so, like, moved the ASMR stuff out of the way, cleared the area, tried to get, like, a little more, like, looks like I'm gonna do, like, a health coaching live chat, and then, like, it was late, and I was like, this is" anyway, so I realized maybe doing Sunday night ASMR and then Monday nutrition chat is a little I mean, technically, I totally pulled it off and was totally fine. So, maybe we'll keep it like this, I don't know, but I'm open to moving stuff around, or maybe it's like, um Sunday ASMR and then like Tuesday nutrition chat or I don't know. I don't know what to do yet. God, it looks so bright in here. um actually you know what I could probably do if I turned this on. Craziness. May not make it to the other health ones. Oh, totally fine. You totally do not have to come to all the chats. I'm so happy to see you when you can make it. But I honestly am like shocked because I know that you have so much on your plate. And then especially with like dealing with health related stuff all day, then be like, okay, cool. Now I'm gonna go listen to a health live chat. Anyways, so totally understandable and definitely no pressure to show up in any of the chats. I'm just always happy to see you whenever it works out in your schedule or you just have a question you want to come and ask. You are so sweet. I have so much fun doing these. Um, I am gonna try to I gotta get my visual thing worked out though, because this whole situation was a little janky. I wanna, like, actually be like, "Oh, yes, now refer to my giant dry erase board." Although, if my writing is this bad on a notepad, probably don't even wanna see my writing on a dry erase board. It's probably rough, rough. But, this was so much fun. I had such a great time, and let's do it again soon. Um, Maybe on the Wednesday chat, I'll ask people again, like, "Do we wanna try to do Monday? Do we wanna try to do a different day?" Just kinda see how it goes, and, the Garfield food. S Garfield has entered the chat. I love that. Um, so yes, I hope you have a lovely, lovely rest of your evening. Thank you so much for being here, and I will look forward to seeing you again very soon. To those of you who may end up being watching this at the on a future date, extra date, please leave a comment. Let me know if there is a preferred date and time that would work for you for these live chats. Let me know down in the comments. I'm happy to kind of play with even different times, different dates, mess around. I know everyone's in different time zones too, so figuring out like what is the best sweet spot and then playing around with different times here and there, I'm all about it. I have so much fun connecting with y'all, and look forward to seeing you next time. So thank you so much for being here, Mel. You have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you very, very soon.